Welcome, viewers and listeners, to another edition of CHP Talks. As we reflect on the events of this past year and think ahead to the things that we expect to see in the new year, we remind ourselves that God is on the throne, that He has good plans for our lives and for Canada, and that He has prepared for us from the foundation of the world good things for us to do. That He further promises in the book of Daniel that in the last days those who know their God will be strong and do exploits. Well, I hope every one of you is prepared to be strong and do exploits for our King in this coming year. The King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ. He is worthy not only of our praise, but of our obedience to perform the things that He has called us to do, and to trust Him in all our ways, to expect from Him the best, the most perfect plan, and that He will provide for us all we need to accomplish the things that He has prepared for us to do. As we look around the world, we see evidence of the collapse of civilization. We see nations at war. We see cities in decay. We see families broken, homelessness and hopelessness at an all-time high. Federal, provincial, and municipal and household debt at historic peaks. And we know in our heart of hearts that this situation cannot continue indefinitely. In the political realm, we see a changing of the guard in the United States, and although we see hopeful signs of new directions and new energy in a number of departments, we also see the deep state, the mainstream media, and entrenched political characters at state and municipal levels conspiring to undermine, to resist, and to hinder the successful enactment of meaningful change. We hope and pray that God will empower and protect the people that He has chosen to accomplish His purposes in the United States of America and around the world. In Canada, we're in a much different situation. Our current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has governed so recklessly. He has spent taxpayer dollars and borrowed money so carelessly. He's treated his own friends and members of his own cabinet so rudely, and he's represented Canada on the world stage so inappropriately that even members of his own party, as well as members of the official opposition and his previous supporters in the Socialist NDP, are now calling for him to step down. It's too early to tell whether he will heed their calls or continue to ignorantly and arrogantly push his agenda on long-suffering Canadians. It now appears, although in politics anything can happen, that his reluctance to accept his tenure as Prime Minister has come to an end, that his firing of his longtime supporter, Chrystia Freeland, from her position of Minister of Finance has finally pushed NDP leader Jagmeet Singh into promising to support a non-confidence motion against the Prime Minister and against his Liberal government. This in spite of the fact that Jagmeet Singh and his left-wing colleagues in the NDP have kept the Prime Minister in office far past his relevant shelf life. Well, they supported Justin at the worst possible time when he imposed the Emergencies Act on peaceful citizens in Ottawa, when he unleashed brutal police actions against peaceful protest, when he authorized the seizing of bank accounts of innocent Canadians who only wanted him to recognize and correct the injustice of his mandatory vaccinations. They, that is the NDP, Jagmeet Singh and his buddies, they supported Justin Trudeau for 9 years while he doubled the national debt, introduced censorship on Canada's hitherto free press, when he created and expanded MAID, the doctor-assisted killing of seniors and other vulnerable citizens. Like Justin Trudeau, Jagmeet Singh and his minions said nothing about the burning or the desecration of over 100 Canadian churches. They agreed with him about the imposition of gender confusion on young children in the public schools. They agreed with him about sending billions of dollars to Zelensky and other corrupt politicians in the Ukraine. They chanted with him the endless refrain about climate change, and they sponsored with him the offensive and obscene expenditure of corporate welfare on auto companies, cricket factories, and pharmaceutical companies. They allowed him to continue to bleed Canadian farmers and truckers dry with the unreasonable and ineffective carbon taxes. And when the carbon taxes and the drunken spending that took place during COVID created the kind of inflation that has made life so unaffordable today, they chose to blame grocery store managers rather than the Prime Minister, whom they now say must resign. And we mustn't forget the Conservative MPs and the Conservative leader, who are poised to become, he's poised to become our next Prime Minister, and we will likely have a majority Conservative government, whether in an early election, which seems most likely, or in the fall of 2025. Well, Pierre Poilievre is riding on a wave of public sentiment, partly for his powerful and articulate attacks on the government, and partly just on the deep desire felt by a majority of Canada today simply to see Prime Minister Justin Trudeau driven from office. And while we do give credit to Mr. Poilievre for his energy, his drive, and his common sense approach on many issues, we remind our pro-life listeners and viewers that Mr. Poilievre supports abortion on demand through all 9 months of pregnancy, that he supports and defends same-sex marriage and the various social changes that have resulted from the legalization of same-sex marriage. We remind our viewers and listeners that it was a Conservative motion that passed Bill C-4 into law. C-4 criminalizes a parent or a pastor who, out of deeply held religious conviction, would seek to convince a son, a daughter, or a parishioner to accept their God-given biological gender and not to seek to have their body transformed and not to adopt a false identity in the opposite gender. C-4 was passed with the full support of the Conservative Party of Canada, even though some of their nobler members now cringe at the revelation of that sad day in Parliament. And members of the Conservative Party cooperated in the April 1st pay increase they've been getting every year that a previous Parliament had established. Backbench members of Parliament today are paid over $200,000 at a time when many Canadian families and businesses are struggling to make ends meet. And there was no significant effort by Conservative MPs to put a halt to these automatic pay raises, of which they are the mutual beneficiaries. And while we hear Conservative MPs and their leader, Mr. Poilievre, speaking about a carbon tax election, Mr. Poilievre has never come out clearly in defense of carbon dioxide. He has accepted the narrative that CO2 is a pollutant, and rather than simply saying that CO2 is a beneficial natural element and a requirement for healthy plant growth and a healthy planet, he has proposed alternate methods, expensive methods of dealing with CO2, including carbon capture and sequestration. Well, he should be honest and tell the people that the climate change scare and the attacks against CO2 are simply a hoax, and that attempts to reduce CO2 should be abandoned immediately. Not just the carbon tax, but every attempt to reduce CO2 should be abandoned immediately. Viewers and listeners of CHP Talks will remember that it wasn't only the Liberals and the NDP who rose to their feet to give a standing ovation to a former Nazi seated in the gallery in the House of Commons. True, not every MP would have had opportunity to investigate the background of the former Nazi before he was introduced in the House, but it is symptomatic of a crowd-pleasing herd mentality that MPs would celebrate enthusiastically someone whose background they do not know. So here we are on the second day of 2025. It is possible that on the 30th of January, according to rumors, a parliamentary committee may put forward a motion of non-confidence that, if passed, would sink the Liberal government and trigger a federal election. There's some question about whether such a motion would be constitutional, so that remains to be seen. At this point, Mr. Jagmeet Singh has promised to support a motion of non-confidence, and if that takes place, the government is expected to fall, and we could be in a federal election as early as February 2025. Now, there are a number of possible scenarios that could derail that prediction. Parliament resumes its sitting on January 27. The Prime Minister, this arrogant man who has been in that office for 9 years, in a fit of self-preservation, he might seek to prorogue Parliament and thus delay any further move towards its dissolution. Or a court could determine that a motion from the committee lacked a constitutional basis and could not be used to cause the government to fall. Or the Prime Minister could step down in the meantime, arrange for a successor to be chosen to lead the Liberal Party, and, although it seems unlikely today, one or more of the opposition parties could be reluctantly convinced to support a new Prime Minister leading an old government. Well, in any of those scenarios, it remains possible, perhaps even likely, that a budget produced by the existing government would fail the required support and result in the dissolution of Parliament, probably in March. And the least likely scenario of all would be that a government under a new Prime Minister would survive until the fall of 2025. In any case, it behooves us in the Christian Heritage Party to prepare ourselves as quickly as we can for a federal election. That means gathering as many candidates as possible in the shortest time possible, with as much support as possible, to conduct as effective a campaign as possible in the hopes of accomplishing what most Canadians believe is impossible: the election to Parliament of one or more CHP MPs who will bring to Ottawa the principles and the values that made this country great, and to restore in our fellow citizens hope and enthusiasm for the restoration of righteousness in the laws and institutions of Canada. And to that end, I appeal to you today, wherever you live and whether or not you have ever had a CHP candidate in your district, to take steps to ensure that in 2025, voters in your district will have the opportunity to vote for a candidate and a party that are 100% pro-life, 100% in support of the traditional family and traditional family values, and 100% committed to the defense of freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, and freedom from unreasonable debt and taxation. If you already have a CHP candidate in your district, or if you are a candidate, wonderful. We are conducting training sessions for all our candidates, both those who are brand new and those who have run before. We encourage all candidates to participate in the training sessions to the greatest extent possible. We want a strong and cohesive team to present our policies to the public. If you do not yet have a CHP candidate in your district, or if you're not sure, contact George Zechfeld at our national office in Ottawa. Email nationaloffice@chp.ca. George is chair of our Election Readiness Committee, and he can tell you whether or not you already have a candidate in your district. If you are considering candidacy, George can send you the candidate application package. If you know someone whom you think would make a good candidate for CHP, please speak with them and have them contact George to begin the process. Of course, it goes without saying that every CHP candidate must be a member in good standing of the Christian Heritage Party. So the very first step to take, if you have not already done so, is to visit chp.ca, click the Join button, and take out a 3-year membership. That is the first essential requirement for candidacy. Well, 2025 promises to be an exciting year. We plan to participate fully in the discussions and decision-making regarding the future of Canada. We can do that best as elected members of Parliament, but even as candidates, influencers, and spokespeople, we can help voters, other candidates, and members of Parliament to think more clearly about the important issues of the day. If enough people understand the issues and set their priorities properly and recognize their responsibility to cast a vote for life, family, and freedom, the CHP could have its first elected MPs in 2025. If not, we will have to articulate these principles and these values from the sidelines. But we trust in Almighty God, who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all we can ask or think. We will not allow the limitation of human reasoning to determine our actions, because we know that with God, all things are possible. God bless you all. We hope to see you on the battlefield. May 2025 be a year of growth and victory and fruitfulness for every one of you. God bless.